Hi there, Darren at ProtoPie here. So in this video, I'm going to start looking at building some movie props. And one of my favourite movies is Aliens, directed by the master James Cameron. And in many ways, it's a perfect movie. It's got great direction, it's got great acting, and it's also got great props. And no prop, I think, has worked harder than the Aliens motion tracker. I mean, the sound design alone haunts my dreams. So being such a fan of the Aliens movie and wanting to dip my toes into prop making, it seemed a no-brainer that my first project should be to reimagine the Aliens motion tracker inside a ProtoPie. But I didn't just want to recreate it, I wanted to be inspired by it. I wanted to make a motion tracker that anybody could use. I mean, you know, to be prepared in case we get invaded by aliens. I mean, Aliens vs Predator 2 proved that could happen, right? Anyway, moving on. So currently ProtoPie is being used for movie props, but mostly for fake apps, things like text messaging apps. But I was wondering, could you actually use ProtoPie to make props in the sci-fi genre? I mean, this is a genre that's predominantly dominated by post-production burn-ins and 3D animations. Shit!
Hey Jonesy, shoot, stupid kid.
Hi guys, sorry for the interruption. So if you're new to ProtoPie and you haven't subscribed yet, today is your lucky day. I've teamed up with ProtoPie and I can offer you 30% off your first year's subscription to a Pro plan. So if you want to take advantage of that, then when you go to make your purchase, just use the code PROTOPILOT. So that's PROTOPILOT, should be on the screen somewhere here, and you'll get 30% off. Okay, with that said, back to the video. Okay, so obviously the first part to designing a prop is to get the visuals right. So to research, I hit the interwebs, grabbed loads of screenshots, watched Aliens another million times, and as you can see here, here's some screenshots of the whole prop, and obviously I'm specifically interested in the screen. And as you can see, it's this tiny little landscape screen that's kind of sitting on the side. And you can see the UI here, and you can see the Xenomorphs, which is what we call the aliens, the little blobs are kind of coming in. So had a look at all the lots of different instances of how the motion design was happening in the actual movie. Okay, one of the first decisions I had to make actually is how to adapt the original tracker to a mobile phone, because I wanted it to be running on a mobile phone. So let's have a look at what I did. So I did lots of different designs. So I looked at how it might work in landscape, thought, well, maybe you can hold it like in landscape. But ultimately, I kind of looked down here in portrait, kind of having the reticle, kind of like the spinning reticle, kind of located in the lower third of the screen, giving you more of this kind of like directional field of view. Trying out some different colors. The original movie is using this red. Tried out some different colors here. Then I decided that it would be quite cool to have a 360 field of view. So I moved the whole reticle up here into the center and kind of reduced the HUD down here, looked at maybe outlining it, but ultimately I kind of ended up with this. So this is kind of like my final design. So this is what we're going to use to build my version of the prop. So I've already exported this over to ProtoPie. So let's switch over to ProtoPie and get started. Okay, so here in ProtoPie, I've imported my design. So we're ready to add the interactions. I've also imported a couple of sound files. So we've got two sound files here. There's two sounds in the motion tracker. So there's the blip where there's no contacts that have been made, so it can't find anything. But then as soon as it hits some kind of motion contact, could be a xenomorph, could be Newt, who knows, it's going to then switch to the more scary sound. Okay, and this is part of the sound design that makes the Aliens motion tracker so cool. Okay, so the first thing, let's just go full screen here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the initial blip animation. Okay, so I'm going to come over to my triggers panel. I'm going to add a start trigger. And to that, I'm going to add a scale response. Okay, so in the scale response, I want to target the motion blip layer. So I'm just going to search for that. So we want the actual group here. And I'm going to scale it by a factor. So I'm going to use a percentage. And I'm going to set that scale size to 300. Set the duration to 1 second. Okay, next. So this is basically scaling these kind of radial blip lines, so the sonar lines. I want them to kind of fade as well, so I'm going to add an opacity response. And again, just making sure I've got my motion blip layer selected. I'm going to make the opacity 0, and I'm also going to set this duration to 1. Okay, so that's basically animating the lines. I want to add an audio file here, so I want to add that first kind of ambient blip sound. So to do that, I'm going to use the playback response. We use the playback response for playing back video and audio. And when I open up the menu, it's only going to show me the audio files that I've got, and I want the motion blip audio file here. And I'm just going to delay that by 0.2 of a second. This is really just to kind of make sure that the sound plays at a certain point where when the lines are radiating. Okay, next up we're going to make that loop. If we just preview this, we just get 1. It's not looping. Okay, so we're going to do that next. So we're going to add a detect trigger. And I'm going to give this a name, detect motion blip. Try and name your triggers. You'll thank yourself in the long run when you get through. Having lots of detects, and find out what each one does can be quite time consuming. Okay, so we want to make sure we're targeting the motion blip layer, not the sound. And the property we're going to use is the scale X property. We could use scale Y as well, doesn't really matter. But basically, when we scale something, its properties are scale X and scale Y. So we're using that to trigger. Okay. Okay, so within this, we're going to add a condition. Making sure our motion blip layer is targeted. And we're going to choose scale X. Won't mark past it. And we're going to look for when scale X equals 300. That's obviously the value that we're scaling it to. So within this condition, we're going to add an opacity response. And making sure we've got motion blip, the layer targeted. We're going to set the opacity to 0. And we're going to also set the duration to 0. So we're kind of resetting the lines. Okay, we're going to add a scale response here. And we're going to scale by factor, the same as we did in the start trigger. And we're going to leave the scale to size as 100%. So that's kind of like the starting size. So this is all just resetting these two properties. And again, we want it to reset immediately, so we're just going to set the duration to 0. Okay, so let's duplicate this condition. And in this second condition, we're going to set the condition value to 100. So we're looking for when it's 100 now. So this is the beginning. And we're going to come into our opacity and we're going to set the opacity to 100. We're going to change the scale. Actually, we need to do a duration here of 1. And we're also going to change the scale to 300. Set the duration to 1 here. Okay, and again, we're going to duplicate the condition. We're going to remove the 2 responses here because we just wanted to grab this condition here. And we're going to add a playback response. And again, we want to target the motion blip audio file. So this is now to loop the audio. So initially we're going to seek. So we basically, when we loop, so when you play audio in ProtoPie, it doesn't automatically reset the audio file back to 0. So you have to kind of do that manually. So the first thing we just want to make sure is it's at the beginning. So I'm just going to type in a value of 0:00.0. And we're going to set a delay of 0.2. Okay, we're going to duplicate this playback response. We can change the action to play, and we'll leave the delay at 0.2. Okay, so let's give this a preview and see if our looping animation is working. Okay, cool. So we've now got our looping sonar animation. Okay, so this is it for the first section. Let me just close that down so you can hear me. Next up, we're going to be creating those pesky xenomorphs. So see you in the next bit. Okay, so next let's create the alien blips, or the xenomorph blips. Xenomorphs is what they're called in the movies. To do that, we're going to leverage components. So I decided to have the aliens moving randomly. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add some random movement to the motion blips. Okay, so I've already got a component I've already created, and I've actually got my xenomorphs. I've got a bunch of instances here. There's 8 xenomorphs lurking around, so that's kind of all already set up, and I've just kind of put them in like random locations around the top of the reticle of the hub there. Okay, so here's my xenomorph component. And again, this is just the graphics that have been imported from Figma. Okay, let's open it up. Okay, so in here, I'm going to add a start trigger. And to the start trigger, I'm going to add a move response. And I'm going to target the top of the component, so the xenomorph layer. I'm going to choose move by because I want my xenomorphs to move continuously. If I keep moving to, it's going to move to the same place. And I'm going to go into my X field. And I'm going to open the formula window. I'm going to write a formula in here. So we're going to use a function called random. There you see it pop up. And I've had to play around with the right values. So I'm going to put in -5, 5. Click OK. That's for the X field. Next up, I'm going to open up the Y field. And I'm going to put another random in there. And this is going to be 0.1, 1. And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to leave the duration at 0.2. And I want this to repeat, obviously, because I want the kind of xenomorphs to continue moving. So I need to check the repeat checkbox here. I'm going to set the interval at 0, so there's going to be no gap between them. And I'm going to tick infinite. So I want this to repeat infinitely. Cool, so there's nothing to test right now, as we need to actually cue the aliens to come into frame. We don't want the aliens just to show up immediately, obviously. For the trailer, I wanted to have control for when the aliens showed up, so let's work on that next. Okay, so back in the scene here, so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to trigger these aliens myself, and I'm going to do that just by pressing anywhere on this lower HUD here, so this kind of blue bit. So to do that, I'm going to add a touchdown trigger. I'm going to target the lower HUD. And within this, I'm going to add a send response. So I'm going to use messages to talk to my components. Okay, so add a send response here. Okay, so I'm going to leave the channel as current scene. So I'm going to send the message to the scene. And I'm going to type a message called blip. That's my message. I'm going to tick repeat. Again, I want this to loop. This time I'm going to set the interval to 1 second because that's the duration that it takes for my sonar radiating lines to loop on. And again, I want this to happen infinitely. So I'm going to tick that. Okay, so here what I've really done is I've created a secret button that I have control over. And I mainly took this route as I was cast and crew of one. There are of course other ways of doing this, but this is the kind of route I took. So just to explain what's going on, so when the message gets sent, it needs to trigger the alien blips. Not only does it need to trigger them moving, we also need to create that sonar effect that makes the blips glow as the sonar passes over them. To do all of that, we need to head back into the Xenomorph component. So let's do that next. Okay, so let's open up the Xenomorph component. Just going to double click on it. So in here, I'm going to add a receive trigger. And I want to receive that blip message that we just created. So I'm going to choose that. Inside the trigger, I'm going to add an opacity. And I've got some graphics here. So I've got a bright light SVG you can see here, and I've got the lower blip, which is kind of like a slightly different low light color. So these two things are going to work together to kind of create that kind of highlighting effect as the radial lines go over them. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to this opacity. We're going to target the bright light, and we're going to set the opacity to 100. Okay, leave the duration at 0.2. We're going to add another, actually, just add another opacity response. This time we're going to select the low blip layer. We're also going to set that opacity to 100. Okay, so that's kind of increasing our opacity. We need to kind of do the other part. We want them to fade back down again. So I'm just going to duplicate both these opacities. Okay, let's go to the bright light one, and we're going to change the values to 0. We're going to change the duration to 0.5. And I'm going to add a delay of 0.4. Again, I've just messed around, a bit of trial and error to get the blip looking correct. Okay, we're going to select now the low blip duplicate. And here, we're also going to change the values. I'm going to set this to 1.2. And a delay of 0.4. Okay, so let's go back to the scene. Okay, so let's have a look at preview and see what we've got so far. So I'm going to open up preview. Okay, so we've got our blips, and I've got my secret button down here. I'm just going to press that. Cool, so you can see now our xenomorphs are showing up. The radiating lines are radiating. The xenomorph blips are blipping. But in the movie, the sound changed when there were contacts on the tracker. So I've got the contact sound here as well. It's the other audio file. So let's hook that up, and we can mimic that tension that was created in the movie with this amazing sound design. Okay, so I'm going to use some variables here, a variable. So we're going to create a numeric variable just for this scene. We're only working in one scene. I'm going to name it aliens. So this is just basically going to track when the aliens are around. Okay, so let's go back to the detect motion blip conditional. So this big conditional here. And I'm going to go to the last condition. And I'm going to add a subcondition. Okay, so you can add multiple subconditions in your conditionals. I'm going to choose that aliens variable we just created. And I'm going to look for when it equals 0. This is basically just to cover us for when the aliens aren't around. We don't want the scary sound to trigger accidentally. Okay, so we're now going to duplicate this condition. And we're going to come into the subcondition. So we want to look for when the aliens are around. So we're going to change the value to 1. And then within this condition, we're going to add a stop response. We want to stop the first sound from playing. So we're just going to find that sound, motion blips. We want to stop that. Okay, so let's come into our first playback duplicate. So we want to change this sound now from the motion blip to the scary alien sound, which is the motion detect sound. And again, we want to make sure that we set it to 0. So we're going to leave that all as is, but we want to set the delay to 0 as well. And then we want to come into the second playback. Again, choose our scary alien sound. And we want this to play immediately. So I'm going to set the delay to 0 there. Okay, so let's preview that. Now, nothing's going to happen because we haven't actually set the aliens to be around. We need to do that. We need to use our messages to trigger that up. So let's do that next. So let's just close this down. Okay, so we're going to come back to our touchdown trigger here. And we're going to go to the send response. And you can see here, when we use messages, we can actually send a single value with them. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to send the value of the aliens into the components, or actually we're going to bounce it back off the scene. So I'm going to check this send value together button. And we're just going to send a value of 1. 1 means aliens are around. Okay. I'm then going to add a receive trigger. So as you can see, this send is sending this message and this value back to the scene. So I want to receive that. Add a receive trigger. Again, leave it as receive from current scene. And we're going to choose that blip message. And we're going to check assign to variable. And we're going to choose our aliens variable here. Okay, let's test that again and see if that's working. So we got our normal blip sound. And if I trigger the aliens, we've now got, oh, gives me shivers, that scary alien sound. Okay, so next we need to create the second half of the effect. So in Aliens, it wasn't only the sound that creeped us out, it was the distance counting down. So you can see in the middle of the reticle here, we've got the distance. For this, we're going to be dipping our toes into some more advanced formulas. So stay tuned and I'll see you in the next bit. So welcome back. So I spent a bit of time thinking about how I could actually detect moving objects. ProtoPie doesn't really give us that ability, and anyway, the motion tracker uses some crazy futuristic amazing sonar that doesn't even exist, right? So how can I fake the motion tracking? I already have the moving Xenomorph blips moving towards us using that movement randomizer that I created. So all I thought I could do, and that's actually what I need to do, is measure the distance between the blips and the center of the HUD. So the center of the HUD's where the numbers are, okay? So we're gonna do that now. So first thing I need to do, I'm going to create another variable. So I'm going to come down to my variables panel, another number variable. I'm going to call it distance meters. Okay, I'm going to add a detect trigger. I'm going to call this detect proximity. God, I can't spell. Proximity. Okay, and I need to detect something. So I can detect any of the xenomorphs, but I'm just going to pick one. So I think I ended up just looking at this number 7 looks quite close already. It's probably the closest one. So I'm just going to use that. So I'm going to detect Xenomorph 7. And the property I want to detect is the Y property because they're moving down the screen. Okay, so within this detect trigger, I'm going to add an assign response. And I'm going to target that distance meters variable we created. And we need to put a formula in here. Okay, so what I basically want to do is I want to subtract the distance, so basically the Y position of the Xenomorph from the center HUD, okay? So I'm going to just write this formula here. So I want the distance readout, the layer, and I want its Y property. And I want to subtract from that my Xenomorph 7 alien and its Y property. I'm going to close the bracket here because I need to apply another math calculation to it, and that math calculation is to divide it by 10. And I'm going to click OK. No orange there, so it looks like we've typed it incorrectly. Okay, so next we need to update the readout here in the center of the reticle. So I'm going to come and add another detect trigger. I'm going to detect the motion blip layer. So every time the motion blips, we're going to update the readout effectively. And within this detect trigger, I want to choose the opacity property. That's what we're going to use to detect. And within this, we're going to add a condition. I want to make sure I'm targeting my motion blip layer. And again, I need to choose opacity here. And I'm going to look for when the opacity equals the value of 100. So when it's fully opaque. And again, I need to add a subcondition. and we're looking for that aliens variable value, and we want to see when it equals 1, so when the aliens are around. So when that's true, we're going to update our distance. So we're going to use a text response. And there's actually two text labels here, text centimeters and text meters. Okay, so let's do text meters first. And we're going to change content to formula. Open up the formula window. And I'm going to add a formula in here. So I'm going to use another function. So ABS, which stands for absolute. This just gives us a whole number. And within that, I'm going to add my distance meters variable. I'm going to click OK. Okay, so let's add another text response. And this time we're going to use this text response to deal with the centimeters. So I want to target distance centimeters, so the other label. Change content to formula and open up the formula window here. And I'm going to add another formula. Now, here I've decided just to create a random number after that decimal point. I mean, no one's going to actually measuring the centimeters between themselves and an alien, right? I mean, that would be crazy, right? So it's something that's just there for effect, and I found this was a little bit more, just kind of gave a better result. Okay, so we also want to make sure we write these two dots. That's kind of part of the original aliens interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in a text string of the two dots. And I'm going to add to that a number. So I open my brackets, I'm going to put a round function in first. And inside the round function, I'm going to put another random function, so I'm nesting functions. And I just want a random number between 0 and 100. I just need to add another bracket on here. You can see this little wobbly red line telling me that it's not quite correct. So I want to get rid of that. There you go. Click OK. That's all right, that's good. Okay, so let's give that a test. Okay, so we're moseying on around, everything looking good. Then, oh my God, I mean, they're getting close. They're like 8 meters away, so we better get out of here. I'm just gonna close this down, then I'll be safe. Cool. Okay, so that's most of the prop done. The final bit we need to add is actually the compass functionality. So when I'm moving around in the trailer, you can see that the whole reticle is kind of like spinning around. So we're going to do that next. Okay, so here we are. The final bit we need to add is to make the actual HUD spin. And as it turns out, this is actually the easiest part of the whole prop. ProtoPie wonderfully has connections with your device's sensors, looking for the word there, and one of the sensors is the compass, so we can just use that directly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and add a trigger, and I'm going to choose compass. And then within compass, I'm going to add a rotate response. So we obviously want the HUD to rotate. And I'm going to target a layer called tracker wheel. So that's basically the group that's holding all of this gubbin. So all of our kind of like circular HUD. And then inside of this range here, so range 1. So we're going to set this to go from 0 to 360 degrees. Not over there though, down there. And then we also, when the compass is rotating from 0 to 360 degrees, we also want the angle to mimic that. So that's going to be 0, 360 degrees as well. And that's it. Obviously the tracker wheel's got an origin of 0, so it spins in the correct position as well. Okay, so to test this, I'm going to need to pass it over to a device because we can't test the sensors inside of ProtoPie's preview window. So join me over in the device. Okay, so here I am over on my device. So I've launched ProtoPie Player, and I'm just about to press the play button here to kind of run the final prototype. So let's do that. Okay, so you can see I've got my motion tracker here working. You can see the compass is now rotating that reticle. That's all looking good. So I'm going to press my secret button to initiate the aliens. Here they are. Getting closer. Okay, not sure that was a good idea. Okay, well, there you have it. Your own aliens motion tracker that you can use to protect yourself, your loved ones, basically anyone you like from those pesky xenomorphs. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this behind the scenes featurette special feature of how to use ProtoPie as a way of making a movie prop. If you have any other ideas for props you want me to tackle, then please leave your suggestions in the comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos from me, and let me know if you like this kind of content as well. Okay, this is ProtoPilot signing off, and I'll see you in the next video.